Okay, it's 6 o'clock, and I would like to wish everybody a good evening and welcome to Danville's Housing Element 101 workshop. I'm going to introduce the project team on this call this evening. My name is Diane Friedman. I am the assistant to the town manager. We are joined by David Crompton, who is Danville's Chief of Planning, as well as Diana Elrod, who is from Diana Elrod Consulting and is helping the town with the housing element update process. Kat Bravo, who is our Development Services Administrative Analyst. Kat will be helping us facilitate the slideshow as well as the question and answer session. We are so pleased to have a conversation with you about housing this evening, as what happens on this subject at the community level is now more and more being governed by state laws. So we are very, very glad that you've joined us, and we are hoping that you spread the word for future webinars throughout the months of June or July, August, and September. Next slide, please. As an overview, the intent of this workshop is to inform, and therefore we will cover three primary areas: the background and the context to the housing element and what is impacting decisions around the housing element process. We're probably going to share more than you have ever wanted to know about the housing element. We are also going to inform you how to participate in the process and the roles of the elected and appointed town officials. So we'll cover the why, the what, the how, and the who. Next slide, please. We will also be available to answer any questions after this session. We will be here as long as it takes to answer questions this evening. So rather than talking at you for the entirety of the session, we've structured this workshop to be a little bit interactive. As a warm-up activity, we'd like to see if you could help us get a better sense of our audience by taking a brief Zoom survey poll. It'll be about 30 seconds. It is now on your screen. If you could please select the option that best describes you on the call today. I live in Danville, I work in Danville, I shop, dine, and/or play in Danville, or all of the above. Okay, so we have 61% on the call live in Danville, 11 work, and then we've got 56% that like to shop, dine, and play in Danville, and then we have 33% all of the above. Thank you so much for sharing that with us and giving us a little insight to getting to know you. Next slide, please. We're going to set the stage for our discussion with some background and context. Next slide. We're going to talk a little bit about California housing trends at the start by acknowledging that for a long time now, it has been very expensive to live in California. You know, there is a 2015 report from the State Legislative Analyst's Office. There is also a American Community Survey report. If you look from 1940 to 2019, the disparity between California's housing costs and the rest of the nation has grown dramatically over the decades. Next slide, please. The Legislative Analyst's Office, which is a neutral body that does analysis for the state legislature. They report, and their reporting concludes that growth in housing costs is the result of a housing supply shortage. If you look at the trends, again, from the 40s into the 2000s, you can just see that land on the California coast, which is where most of our metropolitan areas are located, has not kept pace and continues to trend downward, really impacting this housing supply shortage. Next slide, please. These conclusions from the Laos report also reflect that the State Department of Housing and Community Development, or known as HCD, the number of permits issued for housing units, a leading indicator of housing construction, has never recovered from the Great Recession. Next slide, please. A little bit more about the history and why this is the Legislative Analyst Office believes that it's due to 5 primary factors. The first is community resistance for growth. Obviously, you know, we like our small towns. We like to be in suburbia. We don't like traffic and growth. We like quiet neighborhoods. So there's a lot of community resistance to growth. The second factor is the attractiveness of higher tax generating land uses, which is the commercial development. The third is limited land to build on, given the California geography. Also, the fourth is the cost of development. If you look at what it costs to build a low income or an extremely low income unit, it's the same cost as to build a market rate house, and builders are, you know, not going to give up profit margin. They're in this to make a profit. So there is not enough incentive to build the housing that is extremely needed in California. The last factor is project delays due to lengthy local government review process and abuse of the California Environmental Quality Act, which is known as CEQA, that stops new housing developments from actually going online and moving forward. Next slide, please. Prior to the pandemic, housing production was a central focus for Governor Newsom, whose inaugural address included a goal of building 3.5 million housing units in the state by 2025. This is a stretch goal at best, because that means the entire state would need to produce over 850,000 units annually in the next 4 years, far more than we have ever built in a single year. Next slide, please. And due to these outside pressures, the state of California, the state legislature is more and more intervening to try and solve the housing crisis. It is more and more of a state priority. Over 64 bills have passed in the past 4 years alone that are intended to expedite housing construction. This year, in the 2021 legislative session, 28 bills have been introduced, with Senate Bill 9 receiving the most attention. Senate Bill 9 is making its way through the legislature right now. It's in the California Assembly, and the intent of Senate Bill 9 is to eliminate single-family zoning in the state of California. So if there is one takeaway from part 1 of this workshop, it is that state laws, not local laws, now increasingly govern how cities must review, approve, and plan for housing. If you look at the housing package from Tony Atkins, who is the Senate Pro Tem, SB Senate Bill 5 through Senate Bill 10, these bills are all aimed, they're called the Building Opportunities for All Housing Package. They are all aimed at financing and building and facilitating housing production. As noted earlier, Senate Bill 9 would change the zoning in California where any single family resident, any single family lot in the town of Danville has by right approval. If this bill passes, your neighbor could build a second unit attached to their first unit. It's also known as the Duplex Bill. So where a single family house is right now, there could be a second house added to a lot. There is also a provision in this bill that would allow a lot split. So where one unit now stands, your neighbor could feasibly split the lot, build a second unit on the divided lot and 2 additional units on the subdivided lot. And there would be 4 units where one is now standing in a single residential area. So this is called building density. It's middle density, and the state is planning, their objective is to unlock single-family zoning, which is 65% zoned in California, to create housing. And we really want to make sure that everybody is aware that these bills are making their way through the legislative process. Next slide, please. We're going to transition into the housing element nuts and bolts. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Diana Elrod.
Thank you, Diane. Next slide, please. So why do we need a housing element in the first place? Ever since 1969, the state enacted a housing element law, which says it requires that every jurisdiction in the state contribute to the housing needs of the community by accommodating its fair share of projected housing needs. And we'll explain a little bit about how that works. Next slide, please. Just this will give you an idea of the number of bills already on already in law that we have to work our way through that impact how we do this housing element. This is an element of the general plan. It happens every 8 years, and we have to take into account all of these new laws that are on the books. Next slide. So what is it anyway? It is a plan to accommodate the housing need in a community, and it includes housing at all income levels, from extremely low income up to market rate above moderate income. It incorporates the assigned housing targets, which essentially means that we get an allocation from our local area, Bay Area government entity called ABAG. I'll explain a little bit more about that we have to accommodate those units. What that really means is we have to make sure there's enough land zoned appropriately that whatever that number is of units, that we can accommodate it. But remember, cities and towns don't actually build housing, developers do. So we have to decide how is the best way to accommodate this potential growth. And the housing element also includes policies and programs. And as I mentioned, it has to be updated every 8 years. Next slide, please. It includes, the plan includes goals, policy, programs, quantified objectives. That means how many units we actually think will be developed. An analysis of housing needs. And this is according to a variety of demographics, including seniors, people with disabilities, single female heads of households, and also trends by income category. So looking at the needs of lower income households, especially in the community. It includes an evaluation of constraints to the development of housing, and that can include things such as the cost to develop. Recent study shows that sort of on average in the Bay Area, it costs at least $800,000 to build a single unit. Some places it's over $1 million just to build it. And then the last thing is identification of sites to meet the needs. That's basically a citywide survey of the potential where those units could be allocated or located and developed if somebody wants to develop those properties. Next slide, please. So who develops these housing projections? Well, here's the next Zoom poll. You have an option here. Does the federal government do it? State government, regional government, etc. How many people do we have going on here, Kat?
We have almost.
Give it two.
Here are the results.
Here we go. All right. No one said federal government. That's correct. State government, regional government, city councils, county board of supervisors, or others. Well, the actual answer is, next slide. Do we have it on the slide now? No. It's actually it's a combination of both the state and regional government. So what this graphic shows is the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. It's pronounced RHNA, and people say when we have a RHNA allocation, that means the assigned units for each jurisdiction. So first what happens is the state projects California's housing needs, and it sends a bulk number of units that they think that the local region will need. And that regional agency is the Association of Bay Area Governments, ABAG. And the allocation to ABAG this year was 441,176 units. That's for all 9 Bay Area counties. They then develop a methodology to distribute those units and then assign targets to each individual city based on a very complex series of mathematical calculations, if you will. And then each city and county has to identify sites to accommodate those targets. Next slide, please. So for Danville, this draft allocation we have right now is 2,241 units, and they're split up by income category. This is the minimum housing assignment. There are other ways in which we need to make sure that we have enough buffer around those units so that if something gets developed in place of housing, for example, that there's enough land still in the inventory to accommodate the need. But this is over a 8-year period from 2023 to 2031. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about the this RENA allocation for Danville. The income category, very low income. This is for a household of 4 is $65,250 a year. What this means is that basically the people that you know and maybe yourself is a very low income person or family. A low income household, which earns up to 80% of median, the low income is for a family of 4 is $104,000 a year. Median income, $119,000, and so on. And on the right-hand side, this is the number of units that we were assigned in each one of these categories to accommodate. Remember, it's not a building exercise, it's a planning exercise. Of the 2,241 units, 875 are essentially market rate, and all the rest are considered lower income. Next slide, please. This slide, I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but you can get a sense of where Danville is in relationship to other jurisdictions in the county. Concord is up there at 5,000 units. Walnut Creek is at almost 6,000 units. Unincorporated Contra Costa has 7,600 units that it must accommodate. And that's a big number. Richmond is at 3,600 and so forth. Next slide, please. So ABAG is the Bay Area's regional planning agency. Next slide. And that is the agency that allocates. What main factors do you think that ABAG used to allocate the Bay Area's housing target? Here's the next Zoom survey. Cities with high socioeconomic resources, access to jobs, access to transit, etc. Give it a few more seconds. Okay, the answers are, let's see, 38% said cities with high socioeconomic resources, 63% access to jobs, 50% access to transit, etc. Well, in fact, it's a combination of the first 3 factors. And the high resource areas, which are areas that have good schools, access to recreation, et cetera, have high incomes or have opportunities for people. That was one of the main factors that was considered. The second one was access to jobs via vehicle, between either a car or via transit. Access to transit, it's sort of indirectly, but it was basically access to jobs. Where are the jobs and can you get there within 45 minutes or so? Next slide. This is a very complicated little visual, if you will. that comes from ABAG, and we won't take credit for it, but it tells you, and if you're interested in it, we can certainly make this available. This is actually the process by which ABAG determined how the units would be distributed by income. On the left-hand side are very low and low income units, and you can see sort of the weighting that they put to access to high opportunity areas. On the right-hand side is moderate income and above moderate, which were considered different needs of the community. In this instance, the access to high resources isn't high opportunity areas is not nearly as important as job proximity by auto. Notice it's not by transit for these households because it's presumed by ABAG that those households would drive and not take transit. Next slide, please. So people always want to know, well, gosh, this is a big number and we should just forget it. I mean, we shouldn't try to do this. And the problem is that there are so many now enforcement efforts going on at the state. The consequences of non-compliance far outweigh any of the difficulties of creating a housing plan. First of all, if you don't have a complying housing element, it's the only element of the general plan that must be approved by the state or certified, if you will. If you don't have a certified housing element, you lose certain kinds of state funding, including transportation funds. It can include court-imposed fines up to $600,000 per month. And there are legal risks and loss of local control because the court can come in and mandate compliance. The court can approve housing developments without any city involvement whatsoever. And a court can suspend local building authority completely. So these and other reasons, it also just puts the city at a very difficult legal risk if a developer comes in and wants to do something and the city doesn't have a housing element, the developer could sue the city. So it just puts the city in a very, not only an awkward position, but it also puts it in a very financially risky position. Next slide, please. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dave Crompton, who's going to talk about this particular case study. Thanks.
Thank you, Diana, and hi, everybody. So I'm going to just briefly walk through a case study that demonstrates the significant hardships and challenges that the town and I guess other cities have in complying with our RENA assignment, especially when it comes to the low and very low income levels, which, as you saw by the chart earlier, we've been assigned over 1,000 low and very low units. And so the case study I'm going to walk through is the Lexan Riverwalk project. And most of you are probably familiar with this by now. This is the 144 unit apartment project that is on the south side of Diablo near the southbound Highway 680 on-ramp. And this was actually a development site that was part of our last housing element cycle. This was a RENA site that we created, about 3.7 acres. And it was as part of that, we changed the general plan on the property from what was previously an office designation to a multifamily high density designation, which required a density of between 25 and 30 units per acre. However, the site did end up with 144 units, and that's because the developer invoked what's called the state density bonus law. And that's a law that approved by the state, and cities cannot not allow it to happen. And so they invoked the state density bonus law. They actually ended up with about 40 units per acre. But also under the state density bonus law, cities can only require that 10% of the units be deed restricted to be at a very low income levels. And I know that 10 doesn't really make sense with 144, and it's kind of complicated because it's based on the base density before the density bonus is applied. And so out of that project, we have 10 units that are renting at very low income levels, and the rest are, of course, renting at market rate. And the owner is going to get whatever the market will bear. And so the rest of the units are renting from about $2,600 a month to almost $5,000 a month. And so those are not low or very low. Those are moderate and above moderate income units. And so the problem that we have here is that as part of our last housing element update, we counted on this entire project to count towards our low and very low income assignment. And since we only ended up with 10 And basically we have what's known as a net loss of 134 units. So the state also has a no net loss law that says that, and Diane kind of referred to this as why we need a buffer, and that if you don't provide the housing units that you said you were going to provide as part of your last housing element, then you need to make them up somewhere else. So because we only provided 10 and not 134, we are already kind of in a hole when it comes to our next housing element, that we're going to have to create sites that make up that loss. And that's a real problem going forward, because as we go ahead and change designation on other properties and create higher density housing, unless there's some type of a program, state subsidies or other bond measures to subsidize the cost of the development, we're going to see the same scenario over and over again. Because if you can only deed restrict either 10% under state density bonus law, or under the town's inclusionary housing ordinance, we can deed restrict 15%, but only at moderate income levels. We're going, and the rest of the project is market rate. We're going to continue to see an erosion of the acreages that we are rezoning for higher density, but not actually getting the affordable lower, very low income units. Next slide, please. So we want to, at this point, kind of walk through where we are in our review process of developing our next housing element and the timelines going forward. Next slide. So we launched this program in this last winter, and we've been working behind the scenes on our land use inventories and what have you. And we've developed this public outreach process. We believe it's vitally important this time through our housing element to engage with our community, especially given the impacts on the community that the arena is going to have. We want a lot of input as to prioritizing sites, talking about where, if we have to do these, where should they go and what types of densities should we look at? Should we do fewer sites at higher densities, or should we spread them out more with more acreage at not as high densities? So that's kind of and we want to make sure that everybody's fully educated on where we are and the state laws that we are working under. As far as the tools that we have created, in addition to these webinars that we are doing throughout the summer and fall, we've prepared a website with a number of tools on it, and Diane Friedman, so I'm going to turn back to her in a minute. She's going to walk you through that in a little bit more detail. As far as the timing, this summer we will need to get an environmental consultant on board. So all the sites that we look at to potentially upzone, we're going to have to start studying the environmental impacts of doing that, especially related to traffic and biological resources and cultural resources and what have you. We're also working on a lot of other technical components of the housing element that are really kind of non-controversial. They're kind of our existing demographics, our existing inventory of lands and what have you. So when we get to the next spring and summer, we're going to want to be at a point where we are pulling a draft housing element together. Once we have it together, we have to submit it to the state for review, and they look at it. They have 60 days to do that. They give us some feedback on whether they think our draft ordinance is compliant with all the requirements of the state law. If it isn't, we'll have to make some amendments before we take it forward. Then ultimately, the legal process for review and approval is by holding public hearings, first in front of our planning commission. So they'll be reviewing the housing element itself, any and all general plan amendments to upzone properties or change the land use designation of properties, rezonings of properties, and then the environmental impact report. And they will review that. They will make a recommendation to the town council. And then the town council will ultimately make the final decision on the housing element and all the associated general plan changes and rezonings. And that will need to be done by the end of 2022. And by the end of 2023, we have to submit a housing element compliant and adopted housing element to the state of California for one more time for final review. So that in a nutshell is where we are and where we are going with this. Next slide, please. And so I've already gone through this slide, and so next slide, and we're going to go ahead and turn it over to Diane to talk a little bit more about our public outreach and engagement process.
Thanks, Dave. We've recently launched our online engagement portal. It is Danville Town Talks, www.danvilletowntalks.org. It's a two-way portal where we can hear back from all of our stakeholders in the community. Its express purpose is to serve as the resource of the facts and laws and processes that are impacting the housing element process decisions. Capture and respond to questions, inform the decision-making process with your ideas. Next slide, please. We already see Q&A. If you have questions and answers, if you could use the Q&A feature. And, you know, as we said, we're going to be on as long as it takes to answer all your questions. It is very, very important that, you know, anybody that participates or goes out or hears about what's going on within this outreach process, that you tell your neighbors, the clubs, the organizations that you belong to. We want to get the word out, and we want all of our stakeholders, our community members, to participate in this process and also engage in what is happening in Sacramento to impact local control and your town council, your elected town council's ability to have local planning authority over these decisions. Ways that you can participate: you can subscribe to our newsfeed at danvilletowntalks.org/housing element. Learn more about housing and its governing legislation to provide informed input. We have a legislative committee of the town council that meets on the fourth Tuesday of every month. The legislative committee is tasked with really reviewing the legislation that is moving through the session right now that is impacting the town of Danville. We are very actively involved in advocating on behalf of our residents and our community members at the local level. We are doing everything that we can to impact the legislation that is really going through Sacramento right now. So if you'd like to learn more or participate in our legislative committee meetings, please do so. The next one is this month. And again, it's Tuesday morning. You can engage by attending future workshops, asking questions. We have a survey going out in a few weeks in our quarterly newsletter. We're going to have an update on this process, as well as some information on Senate Bill 9. You contribute to ideas on our portal about your housing stories. We want all residents, I can't stress this enough, to be involved in this process. Next slide, please. So send us your ideas. Right now, if you have your phone, you can text directly to this number, 833-484-3328. You can let us know what your thoughts are about housing, any ideas that you have. It will automatically go to our portal about this webinar. We encourage you to engage, and then you can navigate to the idea wall at danvilletowntalks.org/housing element to do the same. It's really important that we balance the desire to maintain Danville's character with the state mandate to accommodate more growth. And this is not something that we anticipate is going away. The state is very, very focused on housing production, eliminating the barriers to housing, and reducing the cost of housing in the state of California. Next slide, please. We have more housing workshops coming online. The next one is Thursday, July 8th. We will have them in August. We're also reaching out to community organizations. We will do pop-up meetings. If you have an organization that you belong to and you would like us to come present to the organization, we would be more than happy to do so. You can register to participate at danvilletowntalks.org housing element. Next slide, please. If you're interested in state housing legislation and what's going on, you can go to our website to learn more information about it, Any advocacy letter that we write on behalf of the town is listed under state legislation. We have housing legislation listed on our website. You can participate in our legislative committee meetings. No matter what your view, your state legislature, your senator is Steve Glazer. Your assembly member is Rebecca Bauer-Cahan. If you would like to voice your opinion, these are your direct state elected officials that represent the town of Danville. If you're not local, you can find your representative by going to the Find Your Rep legislative.ca.gov, and you can weigh in at the state level for your elected officials. Next slide, please. All right, now we have questions and answers. Kat's going to facilitate our Q&As. I see 10 so far in our Q&A and a few in chat. Kat, take it away.
All right, so the first question that we have is, what's the plan to deal with subsequent traffic if we make housing more dense?
Okay, I'll answer that question. So as I mentioned in the presentation, when we start identifying specific sites or specific portions of the town that we are considering for possible rezoning or general plan changes for higher density, we will have to go through an environmental review. So we are in the process of retaining an environmental consultant to prepare the EIR for us. And so, when we get to the point where we're ready to adopt any changes, we'll have an environmental impact report that looks at the potential impacts and whether or not there are potential mitigations. And so we'll have to evaluate the environmental impacts along with the sites and kind of make an educated decision at that point.
Great. The next question is for you, David. You mentioned upzone. How about rezone from a different use to residential? Is that part of Danville's study for the housing element?
Right. So when I say upzone, I mean basically what, rezone from anything that is now and to a designation that would fulfill some of our needs under the our RENA assignment. And so, yeah, I mean, we don't have a lot of vacant land in Danville, so whatever we do, it's going to take a rezoning for the most part from some existing use to multifamily housing. And I think probably the majority of that would be underutilized commercial or office type locations are usually obvious sites that we could look at. We don't have a lot of residential properties that are under single ownerships and that are in poor condition, and that that would be readily available for, I think, rezoning and wanting to demolish a neighborhood and turning into multifamily housing. So there's a lot of tough questions. That's what the kind of thing we're looking for input on. But I would think that really we're looking for the types of uses like office, light industrial, commercial that maybe are underperforming, that are ready to redevelop and that are able and wanting to redevelop.
Great. How can we ensure that the next developers won't invoke the density bonus law?
Well, that we can't ensure that. The state density bonus law, it's a state law, and it allows any potential residential developer to use that law. And the town of Danville cannot legally say, no, we're not going to allow you to use it. So, we're going to look at the densities going forward for, how high we set the minimum densities for the lands that we look at. And then, if a property owner, wishes to invoke state density bonus law, that's something that we'll have to work with on a case-by-case basis.
And, I just want to add on the legislative front, the town is very active. We advocate with the Tri-Valley cities of Livermore, Dublin, Pleasanton, and San Ramon. It's a coalition of over 360,000 residents. It gives us a much stronger voice in Sacramento. And we've had numerous conversations about density bonus and the unintended consequences of some of the state legislation that is actually exacerbating some of the problems, density bonus being an example of what we advocate on behalf of changing at the state level.
And Kat, before we go on to the next question, I just wanted to add to the question on the rezonings that, you know, I know we've already kind of said this, but I want to emphasize that the rezonings are, you know, we have to provide the land that is rezoned, the general plan that's available for the different densities to comply with our RENA. It doesn't mean that a property owner necessarily has to build. It's you know, they may or may not want to in the 8-year cycle, and we have to look at lands that are at least reasonably redevelopable. We can't just do a paper exercise, but the properties we rezone and general plan won't necessarily redevelop the next 8 years.
Great. The next question is, does the San Ramon Valley Unified School District still contemplate construction of up to 1,000 housing units of its own with an eye to subsidize rental rates or use other mechanisms for below market housing costs?
I am unable to answer that question. I know that, you know, I've heard that rumor before. It's not something that they have come to the town planning department to discuss. So I'm honestly not aware of what the status is and whether or not, if they did do that, whether it's something that we could use as part of our numbers going forward.
Is there any practical means for resisting ABAG or the state RENA impositions?
Diana, yes, there are, and there's an appeal process, and I think Diana can speak more.
Right, there's an appeal process by which any jurisdiction can appeal its number allocation. It's the statutory requirements are extremely precise and narrow in terms of what you can say is a basis for an appeal, but it is possible, and I think the city has been discussing whether it will appeal the RENA allocation. Some jurisdictions don't, but some do. And, you know, I think that throughout the RENA, you know, process, which took more than a year, I know that the town pushed back and provided comment to the Housing Methodology Committee that actually put together the methodology that did the distribution of units around the Bay Area, making comments and recommendations, et cetera, and urging for changes based on local conditions. So it's an ongoing process. The appeals process, local jurisdictions have until July 9th to make an official appeal. And then that over the summer, that during that time period, then there will be hearings in front of ABAG where the town, if it decides to appeal, could you know, voice its concerns and talk more about what are the conditions under which we think that the appeal is needed. And then the final decisions happen basically towards the fall, and we'll know then whether or not the appeal was approved. But that's pretty much, I mean, it's been a long process, a lot of conversations both here and at the state, around the Bay Area, and we'll continue to do so.
I just want to expand on that. We are planning on appealing. There is a town council item, a staff report that is going to be heard on July 6th, which is our next town council meeting. And just to give you a little bit of backdrop as far as the appeal process, I believe there were about 52 appeals. Southern California is a little bit ahead of us in this process. And out of I think the 52 that actually appealed, there were 47 that failed and 2 that dropped off. Not sure what happened to the others, but they're not very successful. But we are planning on appealing that. If you would like to participate in the town council meeting on Tuesday, it is going to be on the agenda. The other thing that we, you know, Diana mentioned this, the town has been at the forefront of the advocacy when we saw this. Our town council, our town manager, our assistant town manager, Dave, The process that was going through as far as the methodology committee for ABAG, the town coalesced with the Public Managers Association and the Contra Costa County Mayor's Conference, and actually testified at the committees and proposed other methodologies to reduce the numbers. And again, we weren't successful, but we have been at the forefront of this. The other thing that is going on at this point is that we are working with Senator Glazer to request an audit. The state has a state committee, or the legislature has an audit committee, and Senator Glazer is working with our Tri-Valley Cities Coalition. We have drafted a letter recommending that the Department of HCD and the Department of Finance and the process of the RENA numbers be audited at the state level, because we have some concerns about duplication of numbers. So that is possibly going to be heard at the audit committee on June 30th or possibly in July, but we are also seeking that avenue, because we are very, very, very much involved in advocating on behalf of the town to make sure these numbers are appropriate and balanced.
Great. The next question we have is, how often are those receiving a break required to recertify income?
Oh, I think this is.
Go ahead, Dave.
I'll start out and then you can add along, Diana. So I think you're responding to who qualifies for the lower income units. And that's basically, it's based on the regional kind of an annual calculation that is put out on what is based on the increase in income, et cetera. And so there's a number that is looked at every year that is based on, I think you can spend 30 or 35% of your income on housing. And so that translates to an income number. It's based on a four-member household, 3, 2, 1. So there's different levels. And Diana, I'm going to turn it over to you to straighten out what I just said.
Thank you. I knew exactly what you meant. So yeah, the state annually sets in what are called income limits, that says basically a person earning between this amount and this amount is considered very low income, and it's a percentage of the median income in a community. And these are classified by county. So all of Contra Costa County has the same income levels. It's not actually true per individual jurisdiction, but in terms of setting policy, that's exactly what we do. So from that, when a household, let's say they're making, just as an easy number, $36,000 a year, which would be very low income, probably in Contra Costa County, maybe low income, but I doubt it. But 36,000, so that's $3,000. They get $3,000 a month. So essentially, they should only spend 30% of their $3,000 for housing costs. In other words, they should be paying no more than $900 a month in rent, which, as you can imagine, for a person who's earning that little amount of money, is not going to be able to find a place to live for $900 a month. So that's how the calculations are made. And actually, in the draft narrative of the housing element, we will include some information that will show basically what a lower income household can actually afford versus what are actually going rates for rents in Contra Costa County. So we'll have that information. Thanks.
Great. The next question is asking if County Connections is involved with this as well in terms of providing more services to BART.
Yeah, no, the County Connection and BART are not involved in the RENA process or our local decisions on how we accommodate our RENA assignment. I would assume that going forward, as demand may dictate, the bus service may add lines to accommodate the demand that may follow, but they're not involved at this point in the process.
Given the existence of the density bonus law, how is the town expected to make up the persistent deficit for very low income and low income housing?
I'll take that on. It's a very difficult conversation because what it requires is a huge influx of subsidy. When redevelopment agencies existed, many jurisdictions that had an agency were able to take some of that tax increment funding and apply it to affordable housing. If you've got, if it costs you $800,000 to build a unit, let's say, a very low income person can't afford that. So somebody has to subsidize that. There are a number of programs at the state and federal level that help with that. And I think one of the most important is tax credit financing, which basically gives investors a tax break if they put in money into some of these deals. The problem is every affordable development that I've ever seen, especially now, has upwards of 10 to 12 different financing sources, and with all completely competing requirements. There will be different programs throughout the state. Each one of those programs may be different. It depends on how the money was who it's targeted to, et cetera. So the actual, and the number of units is so outstrips what the capacity is to pay for it, that as you can imagine, developers of affordable housing are in competition with one another for the same scarce dollar. So that is really, it's a financing issue primarily. And unfortunately, when the former governor got rid of redevelopment agencies to pay for other debt within the state, that we lost one of the most important ways to finance affordable housing. So it continues to be a problem. There are still many 100% affordable housing developers out there. However, I've actually been talking to a few talking about opening up their portfolio to do market rate housing as well, because they can't pull enough funds together to create affordable housing for lower income households. So it's a real problem. I hate to say it's intractable, but it's pretty near intractable at this point without more financing.
And as just again to expand on that, as Diana mentioned, for developers, these are higher risk projects because of the financing component of it. The state just released the budget. They're going through finalizing the budget process. They did dedicate $1.75 billion to the Department of Housing and Community Development. They marked it for affordable housing. So that there is more money coming, but that money was care of the federal government. The state received $25 billion, and that's $1.75 billion that is going to HCD is from the federal government. So the state really, they are also dedicating a lot of money towards homelessness, but there is definitely a financial aspect, as Diana mentioned, that is that has to be solved here, and the state needs to be actively involved in solving it.
All right, we got a few questions about the Riverwalk development, and so I'm going to try to sum up them all in one. So we have a couple of people that are curious on what the town can do to ensure that the fair amount of low income units are included in future developments.
Yeah, so I see that question. I would not say that the developer there at Lexan did an end around and did anything that they weren't allowed or supposed to do. Problem is that the state law for our housing element, they basically say that if you plan something at 30 units an acre, you can count it towards low and very low income. But the reality, at least here in Danville, is that even at 40 units an acre, they're not affordable at market rate. And so if we are only under state law allowed to deed restrict 10% of them, then we have that ongoing problem. And so that's going to be an issue. Diana talked about funding mechanisms and the things that could be done to get more affordability out of projects. And so it also has to do with density. How dense do we want to make them? At what density are they affordable at market rate? So all those types of things we're going to be looking at going forward.
All right, and on that subject, we have a participant that's curious on if there are any developers willing to build developments that are 100% very low income.
Yes, and they are nonprofit affordable housing developers. They operate all over the state of California. I know there's Eden Housing, EAH, Mid-Peninsula Housing, which mostly does work only on the peninsula, Jamboree. There are quite a number of them. The problem is, as I mentioned, they're all competing for the same limited dollar. So they're all looking for the same pot of money.
Okay. Let's see. So this is a question about rezoning. Has there been any discussion around rezoning the Blackhawk Plaza for new mixed use?
I think that would be a great place because that is not part of that's not within the town limits of Danville. So we could, the county may consider doing that. To meet there, the county has a large number, and they may consider that, but it would not help Danville's numbers.
There is a bill in the Building Opportunities for All housing package that would facilitate commercial development, such as when you think of Blackhawk Plaza or some of our strip malls. I'm thinking the one down by Costco. That would help facilitate commercial properties to be zoned and to build residential development. So that is also making its way through the legislature in this package.
Okay, the next question is San Ramon is in the same area as Danville, but has about 2/3 more population. Can Danville plan for more small apartments and condos close to its downtown area to meet the RHNA goal like San Ramon has?
Absolutely. Well, that's what we will be looking at over the course of the next year as we develop our housing element and our recommendations on what lands we want to change the zoning for and change the general plan for higher density. I mean, it makes a lot of sense to do it. Put higher density near the freeway. The core downtown area is historic, and there's probably not a lot that would be done in that area, but some of the surrounding areas are certainly some areas that have some older shopping centers and some older office districts that are areas that will certainly be looked at as potential sites.
Okay, the next question is a big one. As part of the state mandate, what concessions is the state, counties, or cities going to offer to expedite zoning approvals? Will the state have any jurisdiction over other agencies to consider reducing impact fees, permits, school fees, traffic, utility fees, et cetera, Fees and impacts for one single family home is nearly $125,000 per new home. The continuing increase in fees, et cetera, is not helping in the affordability.
I can take part of that. The first part of it is one of the requirements of the housing element is that we have to look at constraints, both governmental and non-governmental constraints. And governmental constraints includes things like fees, impact fees, and so forth, and to determine whether if there's a disparate amount of fees based on surrounding jurisdictions, as well as if you charge more for multifamily than you do single family, that kind of thing. There are also other constraints that may be in the building code and various issues like that we have to look at. And then the non-governmental constraints include things like the cost to develop and sharing information about the things that the city doesn't, or the town doesn't have any control over, but that impact how housing happens. And I think, the slide that Diane had earlier where she shared about the legislative analyst's office talking about what are the 5 things that really impact it is, people not wanting to have development and doing the most they can to keep it from happening, the cost of housing, a huge amount of regulation, et cetera. So there are a lot of things on top of it that we have to talk about and see if there are any things that we can do to ameliorate some of those constraints. The rest of it is specific, I think, and that maybe David has some thoughts about.
Right, and so, when it comes to, the expediting housing there, Diana early in her presentation showed a list of the state housing laws that are in place or going into place, and a lot of those are aimed at streamlining our review of development projects. Some of them basically prevent towns from having more than a certain number of public hearings to review and create a very aggressive timeline where a project must be approved or it's approved by default. There's also state laws that do look at fees and look at environmental review and in some cases exempt projects from environmental impact reports or extensive environmental review. So those are all part of it. We also, one of the things we also look at when we approve new projects is that we want projects to carry their fair share of costs because the impact fees go towards infrastructure improvements for that project and for the streets and water service and police service and all of that. So it's kind of a trade-off. We want to make them as cheap as possible, but we also want them to carry their own weight. We don't want new developments to be subsidized by existing taxpayers.
And to add to David's point on that, any legislation that we see right now that has to do with housing, there's always a disclaimer at the bottom of the legislation that says that the impact to the new developments will be handled at the local level through the impact fees. And there is also legislation that is limiting and putting more regulations around the impact fees. So as Dave mentioned, there's more and more pressure on local jurisdictions as, the state continues to regulate and close in on the types of fees that we charge, as well as, the growth that we have to account for, because there is a cost of infrastructure. So we are definitely getting a lot of pressure on all sides from an impact fee perspective.
Great. The next question is going to be a two-part. How has Danville fared in previous building cycles with ABAG, and what is going to happen if Danville is not able to meet the numbers imposed through the RENA process?
You can take the first question, and I'll take the second half if you want.
Great. Yeah, as far as our previous RENA cycles, I think that prior to our current RENA cycle that we're just completing, that was our 2013 to 2021 cycle, Danville was a community that still was growing and had residential lands out there and available. So we did not have a great deal of sites to find to change to accommodate our RENA. It was really more of things like creating inclusionary housing ordinances and other things that we had to do to facilitate housing and to comply with the state law. So it wasn't until our current cycle that we're just finishing that we had to start looking for sites. And so last cycle, we had to find about just over 10 acres of low and very low housing. And that was done with the Lexan Riverwalk site, which was the between 3 and 4, depending on whether it's net or gross acreage size. And then we also changed 7 acres of the Burrell property down on Camino Ramon by Costco there along the freeway at Fostoria. So that's a 17-acre site that is owned by the East Bay Regional Park District, actually. But 7 acres of that is designated for 20 to 25 and 25 to 30 units per acre. And we have not seen a development on that site go forward yet. So that's still available to us. So up until this time, we have been able to comply with our housing element requirements and have a certified housing element.
So I just want to, kind of clarify. So Danville had to plan for its units last time around, and it did. It had a certified housing element, had a plan for it. The construction of the units is great and gets gets kudos from the state, but it's not specifically what we have to do this time around. With this, every time around, the most important legal thing that we have to do is plan for it and have ideas of sites where the units can go. Whether or not it gets actually developed, the 2,000 plus units gets developed is not completely a problem for the town. It's, yes, we'd like to see housing, but we also know that many forces are at play when housing gets created. So in the end, what we have to do is plan for it. And I think I mentioned, if we can't plan for the housing, if we don't have enough sites that we could potentially put the housing on, then we won't be certified. And when we're not certified, then I talked about all the consequences of not complying, about the fines and losing more local control, et cetera, and also losing money. I think this is the one thing that many jurisdictions really kind of perk up their ears at, because they can potentially lose a significant amount of money from the state if you don't have a housing element. And it's not just housing money, so.
Great. The next question is, have we evaluated what the loss would be to the town if we forego state funding as part of our appeal?
Forego state funding. I'm not exactly sure I understand what the question is.
So if we decided not to comply and we absorbed the loss of funding, what would that result in as far as impact on the town's budget?
Well, it would be more than just the loss of funding. It would be the potential fines up to $600,000 a month until the town becomes compliant.
And even worse, it would, we wouldn't stop the redevelopment. We would basically, have a judge or a panel step in and dictate to us where the housing goes with little town input. So it would happen, but in a way that we may not want it to happen. We don't have any control over how it happens.
All right. Can Danville offer town-owned land to nonprofit developers so they can build affordable housing, provided that they can secure state and federal funding?
I think the short answer is yes. I think that, the Surplus Lands Act actually requires now local jurisdictions to make available any surplus property owned by a jurisdiction to giving first right of refusal to nonprofits for the development of housing.
All right. The next question has to do with income. Has any thought been given to how the 35% of income is calculated? I say this because realtors tell you this based on gross, when the reality is that 35% of gross is much higher percentage of actual income or available income.
It's a combination of factors. It depends on whether you're talking about for sale or rental housing. With rental housing, it's 30% of income, and it should include, when we say it's rent, we'd also mean utilities. So you technically would actually have to factor back out the utilities in that amount. So in that hypothetical example I gave you, and I said it was $900 a month, we'd actually also have to take off this. The county has utility allowances for all like lower income household projects and housing choice vouchers. Like, okay, what is that dollar amount? So it might be $50 for a two-person household. So basically $900 minus $50, it means they have $850 for the actual rent. With respect to ownership housing, is 35% of income, and there's a bunch of other factors that are involved, and that's makes it a little bit more complicated. But we can certainly we'll be talking about some of that information in the housing element itself.
And for the town of Danville, when it's a project that we've approved and we have entered into an affordable housing agreement with the developer, then it's the town that helps verify those income levels. And it's based on, we review a couple of years worth of tax returns and pay stubs. And it's a pretty extensive background review for the applicant to verify that they meet the qualifying income.
Right. The next question we have is, could a group of well-meaning residents invest in a development so that we could get credit for 134 units versus the Diablo Road project developer who only allowed Danville to get 10 credits?
Yes, please. That'd be great. I mean, any project that, is, from whatever economic model you're working under is able to rent or sell the units at qualifying levels for qualifying households, then we count them towards low and very low. So, how that is subsidized and how that is operated on a private level, maybe there's, I'm sure there's models out there, but we certainly would be interested in seeing something like that happen.
Okay, the next question is, have we considered reducing the green space square footage for existing HOAs? This would allow homeowners to buy some strips of land adjacent to their homes to build ADUs that would be less dense.
Well, we'll be looking at, that's the type of input that we're looking for. So we're looking at all kinds of sites. We, in Danville, we have a lot of open space, including HOA, privately owned HOA open space. We have publicly owned open space. A lot of those are properties that don't have any development potential and would require, a lot of them, may be designated under our general plan as open space or agricultural, which we can't allow development beyond whatever current development potential there is without, it'd be subject to our local initiative measure S, which requires a public vote. So, those are all options that we'll be looking at. And so, stay tuned and as we go through this process, because, creative solutions are needed. And there may be some, HOA open space areas that don't impact any of the homeowners, or allow, if the homeowners and the association are all commonly interested in some type of scenario, then it's something that could definitely be looked at.
Great. The next question is, what agency manages the below market rate applicants, whether for sale or for rent?
Well, in the town of Danville, I think I've already kind of answered that question. If it's a project that has been required to be low income or restricted incomes under the town's approval process, and it's under an affordable housing agreement with the town, then it's the town housing staff, planning staff that reviews the income qualifications. There are other programs. There's Section 8, county and state level of income review and screening and programs that are not town, that are other agencies, but most of what we deal with are the local restrictions.
And typically, if it's 100% affordable development, like a nonprofit developer came in and they have their own management company. Each one has their own spinoff management company that does exactly that for these larger developments.
Great. And our last question, which is the hot ticket item, is what land are you considering?
Ooh. Areas in Danville.
Well, we're kind of talking to the public right now about what the state law is, what our arena numbers are, and what type of number and potential acreages we're looking at going forward. And we're at this point, we're not trying to single out individual properties and for where we are looking to change general plans for higher density housing. We're at this point, we're really looking for to educate public, to get feedback, to start kind of prioritizing what types of sites might be the best types of sites. If we do have to make some big decisions coming up, and so really not ready to talk about individual sites, but as we go forward, we'll start narrowing it down.
And I should also mention that, the requirements now for the inventory of sites is so complicated and time consuming that the state has issued 44 pages of guidance about how to pick a site. So you can tell that this information, maybe that's something, Diane, we could put up on the town's website, is so people could actually see what it is that the process that you have to go through in order to even really consider a site. So we're still, right now there are many of us who are doing this, not just for, do this kind of work for one of your neighbors, the city of Lafayette, you know, we're all going through the same process of trying to figure out what do these laws actually mean and what do they do and how can we best accommodate them. So it's an ongoing process and it'll take a while for us to get to that point.
That was it, Kat?
That's all the questions.
All right, next slide, please. We'll do our wrap up. And we want to thank everybody for your time this evening. As we mentioned earlier in the presentation, we are out and we are working on informing you about this process, the housing element process, so that you can work along with us and provide input as we get, you know, to this process of picking the site. So the objective is to inform, to let you know what's going on, what's impacting these decisions, the state legislation that's coming through the legislative session and that is impacting us. And then also to ask you to spread the word, to engage your community members, the organizations. Dave and I are available. If you go to the Town Talks website, our email, phone number, you can email us through the Town Talks website. This is a two-way conversation that we are opening up, and we are going to continue to engage the community throughout this process. We are letting everybody know what is going on at this point, and I want to thank Kat and Dave and Diana for this presentation. And again, thank you. And I hope everybody has a wonderful evening and spread the word. Thank you so much.
Thank you.